crowded, so we might start moving proceedings on. So on behalf of the Pride History Group, I'd like to welcome you all. I am Shirleene Robinson, I'm the current president, and this is a very exciting day for the LGBTIQ community, very historic day, and it's lovely to be able to share this book launch event with you. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present, and to extend that respect to other Aboriginal people who may be present. And I would also like to acknowledge LGBTIQ elders in the audience as well. It's a great privilege to introduce Penny Sharpe, MLC, who will be doing the honours today. I'm sure she will be known to many of you as a long-standing and tireless advocate for the LGBTIQ community in the upper house. She is going to speak a little bit on behalf about the book, so without further ado, I think I will present to her. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Shirlene, and thank you everyone for being here. I have to try and manage to do the book and read my own handwriting. This is going to be good. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge author Rebecca Jennings, who has written this wonderful book. I'd also like to acknowledge the Pride History Group, who I think played an incredible role in opening the doors to the secret history of Sydney and of the wonderful women of this city, and I want to acknowledge them. And I particularly, after today's events in the New South Wales Parliament, want to acknowledge the 78ers. Many of you have had a very long day. And I was so glad to see so many of you there today, and it really was a very important moment in the history of New South Wales, a moment that's been probably way too long in coming. One of the things I want to start with, though, is a passage from the book. And this is the story of Sandra, well, Sandra's here, described what happened after she asked Barbara for a kiss. She eased herself out of the cramped position beside the bed and stood by the dressing table. I moved toward her. She raised her face slightly to meet mine, and I bent to kiss her lips. It was my first real kiss. My hands moved around her body to hold her close, to hang on to her lest I fell. There was something pounding away within my head. My body grew light and was floating. All feeling became highly charged. This is more than just a kiss between friends. This had become a lover's kiss, and she was sharing it with me. As our lips parted, I gazed into her eyes. They were alive with a new light, a puzzled light, but one of which she was fully conscious. It had just dawned on her. The realisation that you are different is something that every woman in this room has come to understand at moments in our lives. It may have been at school when our friends were checking out the boys and we were not remotely interested. It may have been at work when we met a woman who made our heart flutter for the first time. It may have been after trying this thing called marriage with a perfectly lovely bloke, but it just didn't work out. And it may have been after the first time we kissed another woman and found out that we liked it a lot. For women my age, that realisation happened in the 1980s and the 1990s. During this time, there was no internet, but there was Lesbians on the loose. A magazine I devoured with a lot of attention to detail. During this time, homosexuality had been decriminalised, and there was the Sydney Mardi Gras, and that precious thing called visibility. During that time, there was the feminist bookshop, cafes, women's collectives on campus, and clubs where women like me could read about and meet other women like me. And while these days there is much more visibility of lesbians, and there is the internet that has been able to help people find information and community in a way unimaginable just a few short years ago, every woman still shares that same moment when we recognise that yes, we love women, and some of us may even be lesbians. I can only imagine what this realisation meant in a time when there was no word for your desire. How do you explain to yourself what you feel when you thought that homosexuality was only for men and it was considered a mental illness and perverted? I can only imagine what this realisation meant when divorce was not an option. I can only imagine what this meant if it meant by naming this desire could see you hospitalised, imprisoned, sacked, or lose your children. This is why Rebecca Jennings' book is so important. Rebecca has searched the nooks and crannies of a sometimes invisible history. She's pulled together what we know, and importantly, she's also explained why it is that we know so little about Sydney's lesbians. As with too much history, women are often written out of it, and this is a very important contribution to writing us back in. Rebecca has gone beyond the documentary evidence to speak to our elders about their lives, their experiences, and what it was like to love a woman at a time where we were just hearing the word lesbian for the first time. There are so many stories to be told, and so many stories we should stop to take the time to listen to better understand where we come from and how we got here today. The women in this book tell us stories that are rich and tragic and funny and sad. They share with us the complexity of identity and what it truly means to live your life on your own terms. They describe what it's like to get the UK magazine Arena 3 delivered, not having it seized by customs or having your family find it. They describe lives living pretending to be sisters with their partner. They describe the fear of exposure. They tell the stories of shock treatment, of being locked up as a danger to children. The women in Rebecca's book also tell us the stories of living a life a little bit out, but still very much within the shadows of Sydney. During the 1960s, they tell the stories of the time with their gay and transgender friends, where there are stories of clubs and bars of friendship and solidarity happening in little corners around the city. During the 70s, the stories changed to the ones of intersectionality with feminism that leads more to the moves that we made to form our own organisations and split from others and do things not just about gay liberation, but also setting up women's refuges and things like the Sydney Rape Crisis Centre. There are also specific demands, and I want to read some of this because I thought this was terrific. This is called, it was a Melbourne-based Sydney Women's Liberation newsletter, and it's called, I think it's The Demands of Lesbians, I think is what it is, but this is what it says. I don't think it had a title, but anyway. End heterosexism. We demand an end to the expectation that every person will only seek out the other sex for all emotional, sexual and economic partnerships. Lesbian mothers. We demand the right to bring up children while openly living a lesbian lifestyle. Lesbians at work. We demand an end to discrimination against lesbians in the workforce. We should be free to be open at work without fear of intimidation, rejection or dismissal. And lesbian sexuality. We demand that accurate information on lesbian sexuality be freely available to all women. We demand an end to treatment of lesbians as sexual deviants. We demand the right to live openly as lesbians. They did pretty well for us, didn't they? They've done pretty well. It was a bit to go, but what an amazing thing to understand that those demands were being made at a time that was far more difficult than it is today, and for us to see how much has changed in that time. Rebecca's book finishes off with the stories of the first Sydney Mardi Gras on June 24, 1978, and some of you have heard a lot about that today, but I suspect there's some people in the room who still know far too little. And I want to just read very briefly from the stories of some of the women who are in this book about their participation in the 1978 Mardi Gras. The year 1978, in which the book ends, marks the beginning of another potential shift in cultural and political life for Sydney's lesbians. Early in 1978, a group of lesbian and gay activists responded to a call from the San Francisco Gay Freedom Day Committee for an International Day of Action to mark the 9th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. The Gay Solidarity Group was formed with the aim of organising an International Gay Solidarity Day and campaigning for an end to police harassment and other forms of discrimination against homosexuals in Australia. A series of events was planned for June 24, a morning march, a public meeting, an evening street party or Mardi Gras. Over 1,000 people turned up in the evening, which commenced at 10 p.m. at Oxford Street. Many of the marchers came in costumes or party dress, singing or dancing their way down the street, accompanied by music playing from a sound system at the back of the truck. That was a terrific start, but we of course all know how it ended. In total, 30 men and 23 women were arrested that night, including many who were badly beaten in the streets and in the cells, and the police action sparked a wave of protests for an unprecedented scale in Sydney. Further arrests were made on June 26 outside the court hearings and at a protest march on the 15th of July. A campaign was launched to drop the charges against those arrested. Planned meetings attracted attendances in excess of 100. The charges were ultimately dropped, but some dismissed by the courts in October 1978 and others dropped by the police in 1979. However, the consequences, even for those not arrested, were still significant. On this day, it's so fantastic to be here to launch this big book that fills in so many gaps, that acknowledges the rich history that's just below the surface of this city and that deserves much, much wider attention. I want to thank and congratulate Rebecca for producing this book. I also want to thank really deeply all of the women who participated in this book or helped recruit women to tell their stories. We don't know enough about your lives, and we need to know because it does tell us who we are. You're the people who lit the embers and then built a fire for change that allows people like me to be an openly gay member of Parliament, for young children in schools to be running the Safe Schools Coalition, and to make the world a much better place for many, many others. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for such beautiful words, Penny, and for giving up your time on such an important and profound day. And I think looking around the room, as I see so many people here, I think that that's a testament to two things. Firstly, the fact that this is such an important book, that it really does chart history that needs to be told. And I think secondly, people are here because Rebecca herself has done this task with such sensitivity and such respect and such detail that everyone has come out to support her. She would be known to, I think, many of you from Macquarie University, where she's an honorary fellow and was also a member of the Department of History before we lost her to the UK very sadly, but she has come over to share this launch with us today, so we'd love to hear more from you, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley, and thank you so much, Penny, for coming here to launch the book. I just wanted to start by thanking the Pride History Group for very kindly and generously hosting this event. I've been involved in the Pride History Group since a week after I set foot in Australia 10 years ago, and it's very special for me to have this event as part of the group. It's fantastic, and to have you all here, so thank you very much for coming. I just wanted to talk briefly about my experience of researching for the book and the sort of journey of discovery that I went on in doing that. As I say, I first started researching Unnamed Desires nearly 10 years ago when I had first arrived in Australia. Up until then, I had only ever researched British lesbian history, and to be completely frank, my knowledge of Australian history was abysmal. Very kindly, a lot of the women that I interviewed talked me through some of the fundamentals of Australian history and generously brushed over some of the appalling gaps that I must have made along the way. Based on my background at that time in British lesbian history, and also influenced by the reading that I had done in the literature on Australian gay history, I had put together a set of assumptions about what Sydney lesbian history was going to be about, which were, in a nutshell, firstly, that Australian lesbian history was going to closely reflect British lesbian history, that I was going to find a thriving butch femme bar scene, which was going to have emerged in the years after the Second World War, that by the 50s, press coverage and literature was going to have helped to develop a clear social understanding of the lesbian, and also that psychiatry would have been influential in shaping women's understandings of their own desires. And secondly, from the literature that I read on Australian gay history, that like gay men, lesbians' lives would have been transformed in the 70s by specifically the lesbian and gay political movement. However, from my very first interview, it became clear that these assumptions were utterly wrong. The story which Margaret Jones told me in that first interview of her own lack of awareness of sexual possibilities and her sense of extreme isolation as a lesbian in Sydney in the 1950s was echoed in many of the interviews that I carried out after hers. And I just want to read you a passage from the book which relates to Margaret's experience. Excuse me while I juggle with books and microphones. In the late 1950s, 30-year-old Margaret Jones experienced a sexual encounter with another woman for the first time while on an Atlantic crossing. It's very glamorous. She enjoyed telling the story, I have to say, and I enjoyed hearing it. Born in the Sydney suburb of Manly in 1927 to working-class parents, Margaret had been given a strict Catholic upbringing, and her attitudes towards sexual practice had been strongly influenced by Christian morality. She explained, "I was in fact virginal until I was 21, as a proper devout Catholic should be, because I'd been imbued with this whole sense of the horror of losing one's virginity and coming to one's husband deflowered, as it were, and heard all the horrors of pregnancy, and so I was determinedly virginal and waiting to keep myself for the chosen man." In her 20s, Margaret married a Hungarian Catholic, but the marriage was not a success. And a few years later, she left her marital home and embarked on a trip to Canada, the US, and Europe. It was on the final leg of this journey, aboard a ship bound from Florida to Europe, that Margaret encountered and was seduced by Brigitte. Margaret found their first kiss. I'm not going to ask what that means. Margaret found their first kiss a bit unsettling, of course. This is her words. "I wasn't given to these things, and I wasn't repulsed. I was offended, I think." Her reaction was shaped by a sense that to kiss another woman, in her words, was an unnatural and dirty and unchristian and improper thing, inappropriate and bedeviled. Despite this, Margaret's physical pleasure in the experience prompted her to seek a repeat of it. And she and Professor soon embarked on a steamy shipboard romance, which lasted until they reached their destination. And then actually Margaret followed Brigitte all around Europe. Attempting to make sense of the encounter many years later, Margaret recalled both a lack of clarity in her understanding of lesbianism and a clear sense of religious prohibition against same-sex desire. The two women had not discussed the nature or meaning of their affair, but Margaret, in her words, assumed Brigitte was one of those lesbians. It was only later, on her return to Sydney, that Margaret began to reassess her own identity in the light of her experience, and to consider that she too might be one of these women. And she said, "But still I realised that I could have been one of these lesbian women, because the experience was pleasurable enough to think that that was where I might be. But there were no lesbians in Sydney, as there were none in the world, as far as I knew. I'd never seen anything about them, or photographs, or read anything about them. I suppose if something was written, it was in the most damning terms. You know, they were evil and terrible people. And of course, my good Catholic background would tell me that they certainly were evil, that they were not going to marry or procreate or do any of those nice Catholic things." Margaret's account suggested one possible explanation to me for what I found to be a profound cultural silence around lesbianism in Sydney throughout the mid-20th century. The strong cultural influence of the churches on Australian society well into the post-war period meant that discussion of female sexuality was extremely limited, and girls were encouraged to imagine their future roles solely as wives, mothers, or indeed nuns. This situation was exacerbated by strict censorship laws prohibiting the representation of homosexual identities or practices. So as a result, women who were attempting to make sense of their attraction to older women, older women. introduction to other women, had limited access to literary press or film portrayals of lesbians. No literary scandals brought the subject into the public eye, and psychiatric literature of female homosexuality was both extremely limited and inaccessible to the ordinary reader. And this was a bit of a problem for me when I started doing the research for the book, because armed with my British lesbian experience, I had my list of areas types of literature that I was going to go look at, and they were all fairly unproductive, I have to say. So I was extremely grateful when lots of women talked to me about their experience instead. And the cultural silence surrounding desire between women left many women isolated and fearful of the consequences of discovery. And I just want to read you a couple of quotes from women talking about this. Robbie recalled, "It was, without even knowing it, you knew that it was a taboo thing, that you didn't go and approach your parents and discuss your feelings with them, because they would have been horrified and probably wouldn't have known anything much anyway. But it was just something you instinctively knew you had to keep to yourself, because it wasn't something that was nice, and it wasn't something that was normal." Faced with this situation, Deborah concluded, "So I just decided I'd be single the rest of my life. You know, I'd be my own person the rest of my life, if that was the way it was. I couldn't let the family know because of all of those sorts of things. And if I'm never going to like a bloke like that, well, I'll just concentrate on my career and do all that. But I kept falling in love all over the place." Others lived double lives, forming relationships with other women, but concealing them from those around them. Social networks did exist though. The thriving bar scene, which emerged in London and the US cities in the 40s and 50s. Sorry, I'm going to drop it here. Did not develop in Sydney at this time, although some women were participating in a mixed camp scene in the 1960s. But instead, Sydney lesbians developed a unique local form of socialising, which was based around private friendship networks. Women socialised with other lesbians that they'd met at work, in sports clubs, in theatrical and musical circles, or in chance encounters on holiday. And they went on picnics together, they held house parties, they vacationed on the Central Coast. An enormous number, from what I can gather. From the 1960s, these networks began to form the basis of organised social groups. And I just want to read you a short paragraph on one of the most long-standing and well-known of these, Clover. Clover was formed in 1972 when Jan McInnes and three friends attempted to go out on the camp bar scene in Oxford Street one night and were forcibly excluded from a venue on the grounds that they were women. In fact, they were pushed down the stairs. The friends decided to form a women-only group of their own, initially called the Clover Single Ladies Recreational Club. Fantastic name. And advertised for members in the Nation Review. The original advertisement stated, "Conservative camp ladies don't exist? We do. We've got an exclusive club with a membership of 4. Would you like to join and make it more?" Prospective members contacted the group by post and were vetted at an informal interview before being admitted to the club. Early meetings were held in members' homes, but by the mid-1970s, Clover had established themselves in permanent club rooms on Victoria Road, Des Moines, where they had a bar and disco every Friday night. Although some of the group's events were soon attracting over 100 women, the organisers sought to maintain a friendly family atmosphere, modelled on Clover's house party origins, in contrast to the commercial bar scene, which was perceived as public and alienating. Jan McInnes remembered, "It was just like once you knew a few people, you could walk in and everyone was friendly and everyone would say hello. They'd remember you, and you weren't just a blob sitting there in the corner having a drink. It wasn't just a bar where you came and went to the bar and bought your drinks, you know. People were friendly, and if it was your first, people would make sure in the committee they had to go and talk to you, introduce you to other people." As the group developed, it held dinners in restaurants and organised bushwalking and other excursions, as well as participating in sporting events run by pollies. Jan McInnes recalled that in the early years the membership was diverse. She said, "I was just amazed at all these different women. There were different ages, different backgrounds. It was just fantastic." The 1970s, when Clover was founded, did see the opening up of many more possibilities for lesbians. Although, as I suggest in the book, I think this owed at least as much, if not more, to the women's movement as it did to the mixed lesbian and gay movement. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to three women who took part in my research for Unnamed Desires and who have kindly agreed to share some of their memories of the 70s with us. But before I do, I just want to finish by saying that for me, the experience of researching Unnamed Desires and discovering that all my assumptions were in fact wrong has highlighted two things. Firstly, the importance of local studies of lesbian life, because I think cultural differences and specific regional factors have a massive impact on women's experiences, and I think we generalise too much about lesbian history in particular and assume that it's going to be similar the world over, and clearly it is not. But secondly, and much more importantly, the vital importance of speaking to women and recording their experiences of the past. To me, oral history is our best source of information about lesbian history. And that's why it's fantastic that groups like the Pride History Groups are conducting oral history interviews, and that women are agreeing to take part in them. And on that note, I'd like to thank very much all the women who generously shared their memories with me in my research for Unnamed Desires, many of whom are here tonight, so thank you very much for coming. And I would also, before I finish, like to thank Lane and Zita in the chairs over there, who very kindly, Zita took the photograph on the front cover, and Lane very kindly found it and allowed me to use it on the cover. This, Zita is just sitting there in front of me. This was Zita's 30th birthday. So thank you all very much, and now I'm going to hand over to Sandra Mackay, Diane Minnis, and Pearce, who are going to again share their memories with us. So thank you very much.
Hi, so Rebecca's asked us to say a few words about yesterday when we were young. Well, actually what she asked us to do was tell a few funny stories about what it was like to be a young lesbian back in the 1970s, living in lesbian share houses and that sort of thing, she said. Pretty vague, but that's Rebecca. So anyway, we two are doing it together because we've been friends these past 40 years. And back then, we three all understood our lesbianism through our feminism. We can hear you already thinking, lesbian feminists in share houses, how funny is that likely to be? In fact, how funny was anything about lesbian feminism? Well, plenty as it happens. Sure, we're not unaware that in some quarters there prevails a view of lesbian feminists as a bunch of know-it-all, humorous, man-hating, overall-wearing, hairy-legged women who probably never had sex because they may have been too worried that it might have been construed as oppressive of other women. If the truth be known, we found time to have a lot of fun and really rather a lot of sex. Of course, that was whilst we were busy attending meetings, hating men, laundering our overalls and cultivating our leg hair. Remember, we had no truck with monogamy. It was pronounced dead. And so we saw it, we were, as we saw it, charged with an almost sacred duty to have sex with as many sisters as we could. We were women-loving women after all. And not have fun, hardly. How we would laugh after a night of spray-painting Leslie slogans during which someone in all almost fallen onto a railway track, or perhaps had had to run from the police chucking their spray cans as they went. Or the laughs we had recounting to each other our earnest and surprisingly frequent chases of any prowler or flasher that foolishly crossed our paths. Now, a little more of that later. That kind of stuff had us rolling around our share house lounge room floors. Well, as much as that was possible without crushing one of our pet Rottweilers or contracting diseases not normally seen in Western countries from the state of the filthy carpet. Yeah, we had it all sorted. Monogamy, as mentioned, dead. Men basically no longer needed, as any woman could be a lesbian. Besides, parthenogenesis is a pretty straightforward thing that men have been keeping under wraps for obvious reasons. Underwear of any sort, useless. In fact, clothes of any sort, optional. Housework, no, we don't think so. We're done with the cooking and washing and care, and if you go down, that is not our affair. Capitalism, are you kidding? What was private property if not theft? History, I think you mean herstory. Music, well, what more did we need than women's bands with names like Clitoris and songs like Meg Christian's Ode to a Gym Teacher and Alex Dobkin's Every Woman Can Be a Lesbian. And women's dances, yes, we love them. What's not to like about women's bands of, shall we say, varying musical ability? Playing songs that didn't make much sense, and of course everyone meanwhile ripping their tops off and dancing in a big circle. Yes, we were opinionated, sometimes dogmatic and certainly naive, but we were also brave, and back then it wasn't easy standing up and being who we were. And to borrow a phrase from our then priestess Patti Smith, we were just kids. In a moment, Christine and Diane are going to tell you a couple of anecdotes from this time. But we will first just take a couple of minutes to show a few photos from share houses and from the trip we made en masse to a camping ground, a public camping ground, I hasten to add, in the Wallandilly. Just put that on. I heard Cheryl and Mary sing about different kinds of people in the world today.
great weekend. Hi, I'm just going to tell you a little story about one night in the shared lesbian household. I was there.
Not on that night.
You were, but you just don't remember. So, you know, being an out lesbian household, we got a fair amount of unwanted attention and verbal abuse. So, as you can see from the karate photo, we were ready. We also had a couple of finely turned table legs at the front door as well. So one night, we were awoken by a great disturbance from the front bedroom. Mandy and Joy had been perved upon by some bloke. And so we leapt up, flung our overalls on. That's all, just the overalls. Grabbed those table legs and took off after him. He turned around and saw us chasing him, got a bit of a shock I think, and took off, but we were after him. And as, you know, I was once an athlete in my day, and I found myself getting very close and brandishing the table leg, thought, shh, what am I going to do with this guy when I get there? But my sisters caught up. He was on the ground. He was surrounded by 6 furies. Tits have been flying, brandishing the table legs, and we said, "Give us your wallet." So he said, oh, please don't tell my wife, please don't tell my wife. As if we're going to tell his wife what a jerk this guy was. So we've got his wife, we've got his wallet, we've got his ID, we've got his address just around the corner, probably on his way home from work. And we said, right, if we catch you around this place again, we're going to fucking kill you. And he goes, no, please don't tell my wife. And I think we took his money. So we told him to piss off. And we wandered home, having struck a fantastic blow for the lesbian feminist revolution. And I think with this guy, you know, I think the thing was, he had no thought that we were going to chase him. He had just sauntered off, and he didn't realise that we were not going to put up with this crap, and we were after him. And I think, and hopefully he did get such a shock that he never did it again. And we walked home feeling pretty bloody pleased with us. That's all.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Sandra. Now, Sandra's covered some of the highlights. Hi, Alex. Some of the highlights of lesbian feminist life in the early to mid-70s. But there's one thing she did not say and did not talk about. She did not talk about bikes. Motorbikes. Yes. Now, we were the bike dykes before the dykes on bikes. Now, I started off when I was at Crystal Street with Alex up the back there and Penny and a few others in the early 70s. I started off with my first bike. It was a Honda 50 step through. God, it went.
You moved up to a 75.
No, I moved up to a 350 4-cylinder after a few years. And that kept me going until I had the accident, of course. But we all rode bikes. And when I was at Barker Street with Chris and others, we all had bikes. 3 bikes, 6 women. We didn't take the bikes to Wallandilly. Some people did, but we got left in cars. But we did take a trip to a lesbian festival in Tasmania on our bikes. Now, Chris had only just started riding a few weeks ago before that, or something like that, and she did come off at one stage. We just said, we're going on a trip. We didn't plan it, we just went. We went on the ferry, the Tasmanian ferry, and then we rode around Tasmania to this lesbian festival on our bikes. Unfortunately, Chris and Anne were the only ones who made it back on their bike. Mine came back on the train because it was too wet to ride and various things like that. but we had some fabulous times. The bikes were great while they lasted. Not anymore though. And thanks very much to Rebecca for writing the book, and lovely to see you again.
Okay, so I would just like to thank everybody for coming, and as I said, it's really lovely to be able to share this occasion with everyone. I'd like to thank Rebecca, who has travelled a long way to be here tonight, so thank you, Rebecca. Also, again, Penny Sharpe, who has given up her time to be here. I would also like to thank obviously Sandra, Diane, and Pearce for their fantastic stories, and I would also like to thank the Pride History Group, the committee that helped to organise tonight, which Sophie Robinson was a key part of, Scott McKinnon as well, and other members of the group as well. And I would like to thank everyone for participating in this evening, and I believe that you'll be signing copies of the book after this, Rebecca, so you might, I think that's around the corner, so we'll clear the space a little bit. Feel free to mingle. I think there's still some cold drinks, possibly some wine, chance to socialise and spread out a little. So thank you very much, everyone.